Assalamu alaikum everyone, welcome to your 7th video of this tutorial series. In this video I'm going to show you Todo CRUD operation, extracting path parameter, query parameter, writing a macro, and pagination. So let's get started. Now before we do anything, we first have to import a dependency. So open cargo.toml file and import chrono, which is for date and time. So close that. Now inside the data module, create a submodule to do. Now inside this file, create a public async function, call it create. And this will take PG pool, which is Postgres connection pool, task, and OTA ID. Now we have to import PG pool and data error. Now inside this file, we will write SQL insert query to insert a new to do. Then pass task and OTA ID. Now if you remember, we added a unique constraint to our task, but we don't know the constraint key. But we can easily check from PSQL CLI tool, which I already showed you. And the constraint key is to do task key. Now after the await, add a map error to check if the constraint key is to do task key. Then return this task is already exists. Everything else is same as before, you already know. Now after the create function, add another function get to do to get all to dos, and this will take Postgres connection pool and OTA ID. And this will return a list of to dos, which is vector of to do. Now we have to create this to do model. Now at the top, create to do struct with these fields, and also import date and time and UTC from chrono. Now inside this function, write an SQL query to get all to-dos that belongs to the provided OTA ID in descending order and ordered by created at. You can already see there is an error in type conversion. The query as macro returns offset date time, but we want chrono date time. Now we could implement into thread per to-do and manually convert the type and then iterate over all to-dos and call into to convert to our desired type. That will be a bit complicated. Instead, we could use query without the macro. Then we have to bind the OTA ID. And we also have to remove the to-do type. Now we have to add some derived macro to our to-do model, which is SQLX param row and search deserialize. Then we have to update our dependencies. So go to cargo.toml file, then add chrono features to SQLX, and then add search features to chrono. Now there is no error, you can see. Alright, so now create the next function, which is the toggle, and this will toggle the to do. This will only update is done field where the ID matches with the provided to do ID. And finally, add delete function to delete the to do. There was nothing much to explain, so I went past, mostly copied and pasted. These are basic SQL query, or I already explained you in previous video. Now once we created all these functions, it's time that we move on to the handlers module and go to todos.rs file. And now we already created a create to-do handler to render the HTML when the user wants to create a new to-do. Now we have to create a handler function when the user submits the create to-do form, which is for post request. Now before we create that, we need a model to extract the form data. So create a public submodule inside models, call it to-do form model. Now inside this file, import search deserialize. Then create a public struct create to-do form model, which has only one field text of type string, and derive this from deserialize. Now go back to todos.rs file, create a public async function post create to-do handler. This will take session current user extension, app state, and finally create to-do form model. And you are already familiar with all of these arguments. Now it's complaining because we have to import them. So select and click on this yellow bulb and import them one by one. Now inside this function, first get access to the user ID from client user. Now this returns option type. We can call unwrap to get the sum type value. Because this handler will be behind a protected route, only authenticated user will have access to it. Since authenticated user will have a valid user ID, we can safely call unwrap. If you don't want to unwrap, you can add a match statement and then send unauthorized response. Now let's create a new to-do called create function from to-do. And we have to import that. And it takes connection pool, then task which we can get from create to do form, then voter ID which is the user ID. Then add away, don't add a question because this returns a failed query data error and we wanna send this to the client. Now we could simply add a iflet and check if there is a failed query data error, then we can send a flash message to the client just like we did inside auth.rs file. And if I search for failed query, and we can see when we created a new user and get a result of unique type and data error, we first checked if there is a data error and then failed query and we send a plus message. And it's not just only in this place. Every time we have a failed query data error, if we just check another place, you can see when we try to authenticate user, we get back a result of I32 and data error. We did the same, but this time we added a match statement to get the user ID. This time we have a type that we need to use it. We can definitely extract this logic to a separate function. Now copy the match statement, not the iflet, because we will return the OK type and make our function more generic. Then go to helpers.rs file. Now you don't have to do that because I'm not gonna create any function, I'm just gonna show you the problem is. So call it handler, it doesn't matter the name, and then paste that inside. And we will pass the result to this function, which is result of OK type and data error. Now first we will check if we have a OK type, then return it. So the return type will be the type of wherever the OK type is. Like here the user ID is I32. And if there is an error and if the error is failed query data error, then the return type becomes response. Otherwise the return type is app error. And you can see we have 3 nested return types. Now we could simply keep this logic which is inside the error block, and therefore the return type will become result of response and app error. So now when we call this function, we first have to check if the result has an error, and that could be repetitive. Now that's necessarily not a bad thing. Since we are using Rust, we can use Rust's macro and put this logic inside a macro, and we don't have to worry about return types. So let's go ahead and create a macro submodule inside handlers and then add that to the mod.rs file. No need to make it public because we won't use it outside of this module. Now create a macro named handle client error. We use macro rules with bang at the end, which is a declarative macro to declare a macro. And we want to pass 3 arguments, but macro doesn't take argument, it takes pattern. So let's add first pattern which will match the result. This dollar symbol at the beginning used to tell this is a macro variable, then colon, then expr which is a fragment specifier, and it will match any kind of expression. Anyway, let's add session and response as well. Now we can go to helpers.rs file, then cut everything inside this function and then get rid of this function because we don't need that. Paste everything inside here. Now first match on result. Then rename this variable to value and return this. Inside the macro, we don't get any IntelliSense or code completion. So it's better for us that we extract this logic into a separate function. And also it will be easier to deal with the return types. So create a public async function, call it handle error. This will return result of response and app error. And now we have to import them. Then cut everything inside the error block and paste here. Now we need to import data error, helper submodule, class status, and finally redirect. Now this function will take 3 arguments: error, which is data error, session, and response. And we have to import session. And finally return the response from this OK block. Then remove this question and call into on this error. This will convert data error to app error. Once that's done, call handle error from here and pass error, session, and response. And finally export this macro. Now go back to todos.rs file and call this macro, which will also import this. Then pass result, session, and the response if there is a client error, which is redirect to todos route. After that, if we don't get any error, send a success flash message and redirect to todos. Now handle client error is complaining because it can't find this handle error function. So we have to provide the absolute path. This $symbol create is called meta variable. It's not a macro variable, it's a reserved keyword. Then return this and call await at the end, which I forgot to call. Once that's done, now inside the auth.rs file, we're gonna replace this match statement with handle client error and pass user ID, session, and the client response, which is this response. So we can copy and paste that. And this returns the OK type, which we need to store. And you can see it also import the type. Next, return this success response, cut this and paste here. And get rid of this, and our code now looks a lot shorter. And now we can go up and do the same in other place where we look for fail query data error. As usual, call the handle client error macro, then pass the result and session, and finally redirect to sign up. And delete this code and everything else will be the same. Now let's go to todos.rs file and go up, then update todos handler, which will return all todos. First get the flash data. And then add session argument. Then get the user ID from current user. And we can safely call unwrap because only authenticated user will have access to this todos handler. Then add app state argument to this function. Then get all todos from the database. And now pass flash data and todos to todos template. And now we have to update todos template. Add these two fields, flash data and todos of type vector todo. And finally import todo model from data. Next, let's update the template. Go to create.html file. Get rid of everything inside main block, then replace with this code. Next, open todos.html file. Then add a CSS block which links to todo.css file. Then inside the main block, add flash message partial, since we're gonna show a flash message on this page. Now get rid of this h1 tag, then add a if-else statement. Then check if the to-dos list is empty. Then show a text empty to-dos in h1 tag. Otherwise, inside the else block, add a for loop to iterate over all to-dos and show each to-do. Now let's go to routes.rs file and register to-do routes. So create a new function to-do routes which returns router of app state. Then register a route on path / with a get method which will have to-dos handler, which is this route, so you can delete this from here. Then add another route on path / create with get and post method, and import post create to-do handler. Then we can also get rid of this route from here, which is similar to the create All to-do routes will require to authenticate. So you can think of breaking into small app. Now we want to add them to the main route using nest method. So we can add that inside protected route function. So add nest method before this middleware, and the path is to-dos, and the router is to-do routers. And this path will append before all to-do routes. So now this path will become /to-dos, and this path will become /to-dos /create. Now we have to go to create.html file and update this path, which will be to-dos s at the end, because we just updated our route, this route. Now before we go and run our app, we have to go to auth.rs and macros.rs and remove these two imports. Now finally run our app. Then go to the browser and first log in. Then we have to also update the navigation bar. So go to the partial and go to navigation.html file and update this path to /to-dos /create. Now go back to the browser, then go to create page and add a new to-do. And you can see we are able to create a new to-do, and we also get success flash message. Next, let's quickly implement toggle and delete button. Now I am inside to-dos.html file, and this is the card which shows each to-do. Now let's add a leading button, and it's just a form with a submit button, and based on to-do state, show either done or undone button. Now when the button is clicked, we have to somehow send current state of that to-do, so we can update isDone property in our database. Therefore, I added an hidden input, and the value will be opposite to isDone. So for example, if isDone is true, we will send false. Now we have to somehow specify which to-do is clicked. So we have to send the ID to the server. Instead of adding another hidden input, we will add that to the path parameter. So we can update the request path to /to-dos /toggle, and then after that insert the to-do ID, which will be different for each to-do. And on the server we can extract this and identify the to-do. Now just like we added leading button, also add a trailing button to delete the to-do, which will make post request add /to-dos /delete, then add the to-do ID. And we don't need to send any data to the server. Next, we have to create a model struct to extract the param data. So go to models and then to-do param model. Then add toggle to-do param model with a public field isDone, which is of type boolean. Then go to to-dos.rs file. Then add these two handlers, toggle to-do handler and delete to-do handler. And both of them will redirect to /to-dos. Now let's go to routers.rs file and update to-do routes. Now add these two routes inside to-do routes. The first route path is /toggle, then /:ID. This :ID is a variable we assign to capture the path parameter. Since we set the to-do ID to dynamic path parameter, similar to toggle, we also added for delete. And now import these two handlers. Now let's go back and update the handlers. So first we have to import the path extractor from Axum extract. Then add that to the argument of this function, and also the structure, and the type is i32. Then also add param extractor of type toggle to do param model. Once that's done, we can now update the to-do. Call toggle and pass the required arguments. Just like toggle to-do handler, also add path extractor to delete to-do handler. Then call delete to delete to-do from database. Now let's go back to the browser and we are able to toggle and delete to-do. Now I added some to-dos, and as you can see, we are querying all to-dos. There is no pagination, so let's go ahead and add pagination. Now let's go to todo.rs file inside data folder. Then add two arguments to get all function. First is page size, which is the total amount of to-dos per page. Second is page, which is the current page. Now update the query, add limit to limit how many items we want, and offset to skip that amount of items before returning. Now bind the page size to limit. Now we have to calculate the offset. We can't bind page to offset. Add a separate function to calculate offset, which will take page and page size. Finally, bind page offset. And also add another function that will return total to-dos. We use scalar query because this will fetch single value, and it's optimized for that, since count by default return int8 or i64 in Rust. So we downcasted to int4, which is i32. So far, when the client visits to /todos, the server shows all to-dos. Since we wanna add pagination, we wanna keep the current page state in the path parameter. So add a variable for dynamic path parameter, call it page. Now update to-dos handler. First extract the current page from path parameter using path extractor. For the sake of this tutorial, we will show 3 to-dos per page. Now pass page size and current page to getO function. Now update all redirect routes, which are now /todos to /todos /1, which is the first page. Also do it inside auth.rs file. Finally, go to navigation.html file and update this path. Now let's go back to the browser, and if I log in, you can see we are in /todos process 1. And now if I manually update the URL path, we are able to go different page. Next, we have to add some button to go to next and previous page. Next, we are gonna add two functions for next page and previous page. That will let us calculate the page number right inside the template. Go ahead and add a new public submodule named functions inside handler module. Then add these two functions. First is previous page, which takes page of i32, then decrement the value and return. Second is next page. Similarly, this will increment the value and return. Now let's update to-dos template struct and add these 4 fields: current page and total page of type i32, and the next page and previous page has the function signature of these functions. Now update the to-dos handler, and you can see it already started to complain. First, get total to-dos count. Then pass current page to to-dos template, which we can get from path parameter. Then total page, which we need to compute, and I got this logic from the internet. You can look for it, it's not that complicated. Then next page and previous page, we will give pointer to those functions. Now once that's done, create a new partial, call it pagination.html. I'm going to copy and paste some codes. Alright, so after rendering, I realized that there is some problem with indentation, and I explained you incorrectly. So first we will show the current page and total page. Then we add the if block and then check if the total page is not equal to 1, which means that if we have more than 1 pages. Now we could simply add a greater than also. And this is the end of this if block. So let me just fix the indentation. Now inside this if block, this piece of code, we are showing these 2 buttons. So first is the previous button and the second is the next button, and each of them are wrapped inside the if block. So for previous button, we are checking if the current page is greater than 1. So we only show the previous page button if we are on the first page. And for next button, let me fix this indentation again. So we will check if the current page is less than total page, which means that if we are not on the last page. If we are on the last page, then we won't show the next page button. And finally, inside the link tag, when these buttons are clicked, we are redirecting to /todos, then previous page function and pass current page. And for next page button, we added next page function and pass current page, and obviously it will decrement and increment the current page. And finally include the pagination partial after the for loop, which is inside todos.xml file. Go back to the browser and you can see now we have working buttons to go next and previous page. Now if I go to the second page and undone this task, I am redirected to the first page. And also if I delete that task, and I am now again redirected to the first page. But we want to keep the current page state. We don't want to be redirected to first page when we update or delete any task. So we can send the current page state using query parameter. In the URL path, we can add a question mark, then the key, then equal, then the value. In our case, we will pass the current page and we will use the key to grab the value on the server. Now here in the toggle button, when we make post request, update this path, add a question, then insert the current page, and do that for delete button as well. Now inside to do form model, add a struct to extract the query parameter. Then update toggle to do handler, add query extractor to the argument, import that from Axum extract and the model. Then create a variable to construct the path, its /todos, then string interpolation, then the page which we get from query parameter. Finally add the reference here. Do the same for delete to do handler. Now go back to the browser and test this. And finally, we are able to persist the current page state even if we toggle or delete any task. If you notice, we are not showing to do created time, even though we have created at field. So let's go ahead and work on that. Now add a p tag to show task created time. As you can see, to do date is a function. So let's go ahead and add that function inside functions.rs file. Also import chrono UTC. Now update todos template struct, add that function field. Finally go to todos handler and give that function pointer. And it seems it didn't auto import, so import that. And you can see our task created time is now showing on the browser. Alright, that's it for this tutorial. If you like this video, then give me a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.